Reason and Revolution by Herbert Marcuse. Part 2, The Rise of Social Theory, Chapter 1.5, The Foundations of the Dialectical Theory of Society, the Abolition of Labor. The realization of freedom and reason requires a reversal of this state of affairs. Universal dependence, this natural form of the world, historical cooperation of individuals, will be transformed by this communist revolution into the control and conscious mastery of these powers, which, born of the action of men on one another, have till now overawed and governed men as powers completely alien to them. Moreover, since the state of affairs that has prevailed till now is a universal negativity affecting all spheres of life everywhere, its transformation requires a universal revolution. That is to say, a revolution that would reverse, first, the totality of prevailing conditions, and secondly, would replace this with a new universal order. The material elements of complete revolution must be present so that the convulsion grips not specific conditions in the existent society, but the very production of life prevailing in it, the total activity on which it has been based. This totalitarian character of the revolution is made necessary by the totalitarian character of the capitalist relations of production. Modern universal intercourse can be controlled by individuals only when controlled by all. The revolutionary convulsion that ends the system of capitalist society sets free all the potentialities for general satisfaction that have developed in this system. Marx accordingly calls the communist revolution an act of appropriation, meaning that with the abolition of private property, men are to obtain true ownership over all those things that have hitherto remained estranged from them. Appropriation is determined by the object to be appropriated, that is, by the productive forces which have been developed to a totality and which only exist within a universal intercourse. From this aspect alone, therefore, this appropriation must have a universal character. The universality that exists in the present state of society will be transposed to the new social order where, however, it will have a different character. The universal will no longer operate as a blind natural force once men have succeeded in subjecting the available productive forces to the power of individuals united. Man will then, for the first time in history, consciously treat all natural premises as the creatures of men. His struggle with nature will pursue a general plan formulated by freely combined individuals. The appropriation is also determined by the persons appropriating. The alienation of labor creates a society split into opposing classes. Any social scheme that affects a division of labor without taking account of the abilities and needs of individuals and assigning them their roles tends to shackle the activity of the individual to external economic forces. The mode of social production, the way in which the life of the whole is maintained, circumscribes the life of the individual and harnesses his entire existence to relations prescribed by the economy without regard to his subjective abilities or wants. Commodity production under a system of free competition has aggravated this condition. The commodities allotted to the individual for the gratification of his needs were supposed to be the equivalent of his work. Equality seemed to be guaranteed, at least in this respect. The individual could not, however, choose his work. It was prescribed for him by his position in the social process of production, which was in turn forced upon him by the prevailing distribution of power and wealth. The fact of classes contradicts freedom, or rather transforms it into an abstract idea. The class circumscribes the actual range of individual freedom within the general anarchy. The arena of free play still open to the individual. Each is free to the extent that his class is free, and the development of his individuality is confined to the limits of his class. He unfolds himself as a class individual. The class is the actual social and economic unit, not the individual. It achieves an independent existence over against the individuals, so that the latter find their conditions of existence predestined and hence have their position in life and their personal development assigned to them by their class and become subsumed under it. The existent form of society accomplishes a universal order only by negating the individual. The personal individual becomes a class individual, and his constituent properties become universal properties that he shares with all other members of his class. His existence is not his, but that of his class. We recall Hegel's statement that the individual is the universal, that he acts historically not as a private person, but as a citizen of a state. Marx understands this negation of the individual to be the historical product of class society, effectuated not by the state, but by the ordering of labor. The subsumption of individuals under classes is the same phenomenon as their subjection to the division of labor. By division of labor, Marx here means the process of separating various economic activities into specialized and delimited fields. First, industry and commerce separated from agriculture, then industry separated from commerce, and finally the latter subdivided into different branches. This entire differentiation takes place under the requirements of commodity production in its capitalistic form, accelerated by the progress of technology. It is a blind and natural process. The totality of labor required to perpetuate a society appears as an a priori given body of work that is organized in a definite way. The specific division of labor that prevails seems an unalterable necessity that drags the individuals into its toils. Business becomes an objective entity that gives men a certain standard of living, a set of interests, and a range of possibilities that mark them off from men engaged in other businesses. The conditions of labor mold the individuals into groups or classes, and are class conditions converging upon the fundamental division into capital and wage labor. The two fundamental classes, however, are not classes in the same sense. The proletariat is distinguished by the fact that, as a class, it signifies the negation of all classes. The interests of all other classes are essentially one-sided. The proletariat's interest is essentially universal. The proletariat has neither property nor profit to defend. Its one concern, the abolition of the prevailing mode of labor, is the concern of society as a whole. This is expressed in the fact that the communist revolution, in contrast to all previous revolutions, can leave no social group in bondage, because there is no class below the proletariat. The universality of the proletariat is, again, a negative universality, indicating that the alienation of labor has intensified to the point of total self-destruction. The labor of the proletarian prevents any self-fulfillment. His work negates his entire existence. This utmost negativity, however, takes a positive turn. The very fact that he is deprived of all assets of the prevailing system sets him beyond the system. He is a member of the class, which is really rid of all the old world and at the same time stands pitted against it. The universal character of the proletariat is the final basis for the universal character of the communist revolution. The proletariat is the negation not only of certain particular human potentialities, but also of man as such. All specific distinguishing marks by which men are differentiated lose their validity. Property, culture, religion, nationality, and so on, all things that might set one man off from another, make no such mark among proletarians. Each lives in society only as the bearer of labor power, and each is thus the equivalent of all others of his class. His concern to exist is not the concern of a given group, class, or nation, but is truly universal and world historical. The proletariat can thus only exist world historically. The communist revolution, its movement, is therefore necessarily a world revolution. The prevailing social relations that the revolution upsets are everywhere negative, because they everywhere result from a negative ordering of the labor process that perpetuates them. The labor process itself is the life of the proletariat. Abolition of the negative ordering of labor Alienated labor, as Marx terms it, is hence at the same time the abolition of the proletariat. The abolition of the proletariat also amounts to the abolition of labor as such. Marx makes this an express formulation when he speaks of the achievement of revolution. Classes are to be abolished by the abolition of private property and of labor itself. Elsewhere, Marx says the same thing. The communistic revolution is directed against the preceding mode of activity, does away with labor. And again, the question is not the liberation, but the abolition of labor. The question is not the liberation of labor because labor has already been made free. Free labor is the achievement of capitalist society. Communism can cure the ills of the bourgeois and the distress of the proletarian only by removing their cause, namely labor. These amazing formulations in Marx's earliest writings all contain the Hegelian term Hoffnung, so that abolition also carries the meaning that a content is restored to its true form. Marx, however, envisioned the future mode of labor to be so different from the prevailing one that he hesitated to use the same term, labor, to designate alike the material process of capitalist and of communist society. He uses the term labor to mean what capitalism actually understands by it in the last analysis, that activity which creates surplus value in commodity production, or which produces capital. Other kinds of activity are not productive labor, and hence are not labor in the proper sense. Labor thus means that free and universal development is denied the individual who labors, and it is clear that in this state of affairs, the liberation of the individual is at once the negation of labor. An association of free individuals to Marx is a society wherein the material process of production no longer determines the entire pattern of human life. Marx's idea of a rational society implies an order in which it is not the universality of labor, but the universal satisfaction of all individual potentialities that constitutes the principle of social organization. He contemplates a society that gives to each not according to his work, but his needs. Mankind becomes free only when the material perpetuation of life is a function of the abilities that and happiness of associated individuals. We can now see that the Marxian theory has developed a full contradiction to the basic conception of idealist philosophy. The idea of reason has been superseded by the idea of happiness. Historically, the first was interlaced into a society in which the intellectual forces of production were detached from the material ones. Within this framework of social and economic iniquities, the life of reason was a life of higher dignity. It dictated individual sacrifice for the sake of some higher, universal independent of the base impulses and drives of individuals. The idea of happiness, on the other hand, roots itself firmly in the demand for a social ordering that would set aside the class structure of society. Hegel had emphatically denied that the progress of reason would have anything to do with the satisfaction of individual happiness. Even the most advanced concepts of the Hegelian philosophy, as we have shown, preserved and, in the last analysis, condoned the negativity of the existing social system. Reason could prevail even though the reality shrieked of individual frustration. Idealist culture and the technological progress of civil society bear witness of that. Happiness could not. The demand that free individuals attain satisfaction militated against the entire setup of traditional culture. The Marxian theory consequently rejected even the advanced ideas of the Hegelian scheme. The category of happiness made manifest the positive content of materialism. Historical materialism appeared at first as a denunciation of the materialism prevalent in bourgeois society, and the materialist principle was in this respect a critical instrument of exposé directed against a society that enslaved men to the blind mechanisms of material production. The idea of the free and universal realization of individual happiness, per contra, denoted an affirmative materialism, that is to say, an affirmation of the material satisfaction of man. We have dwelt rather extensively upon Marx's early writings because they emphasize tendencies that have been attenuated in the post-Marxian development of his critique of society, namely the elements of communistic individualism, the repudiation of any fetishism concerning the socialization of the means of production or the growth of the productive forces, the subordination of all these factors to the idea of the free realization of the individual. Under all aspects, however, Marx's early writings are mere preliminary stages to his mature theory, stages that should not be overemphasized.